Today, I want to introduce you to a spiritual practice that has been deeply nourishing for me, but also one that I hope will be helpful to you during this time of social distancing. It's called centering prayer. Now, you may have heard the terms centering prayer and contemplative prayer used interchangeably, but centering prayer is really just a method for silent praying. It was developed by a Cistercian monk named Thomas Keating as a way of translating the monastic experience of contemplative silence into a form that could be practiced by anyone at any time. Most monks and nuns spend at least some time every day in intentional silence as a way of learning to surrender more and more fully to God. This is, of course, modeled after Jesus' own prayer practice, as we see in the scriptures, how he would often go off to a quiet place alone in order to be with God. Over time and with practice, we can learn to become more receptive and attuned to experiences of what we call contemplation or contemplative prayer, which, technically speaking, is not something that we can conjure or achieve through any sort of special prayer or meditation technique alone. Contemplation is a gift. It is the gift of total awareness. It's been described as a state of complete union with God, of total trusting and resting in God. Many Christians throughout history have written about this experience, from the early Desert Fathers and Mothers to John Cassian, Hildegard of Bingen, Teresa of Avila, Julian of Norwich, and of course Thomas Merton. But also many everyday people have also received flashes of contemplative experience in their lives. Sometimes people think of these as born-again experiences or conversion experiences, these moments of total spiritual clarity. Again, these experiences are understood to be a gift of grace. They cannot be forced or conjured or earned, but rather they are something that we learn to fall into. The presence of God is always with us. It's been said that God is always closer to us than our next breath. Or in the words of St. Patrick, God is above us, beneath us, in front of us, behind us, beside us, and within us. But we forget this. We lose sight of this all the time as we become worried and distracted about so many things. How we're doing with our jobs, what other people think of us, whether we're doing enough, whether we have enough money, what's going to happen with our health or the health of those we love. Centering prayer is a discipline that helps us with our remembering. It's a practice of remembering to return to an awareness of God's presence, no matter where we are or what we might be going through. To start, we find a comfortable place to sit, preferably somewhere that you know you won't experience too many external distractions during your prayer time. The normal suggested amount of time for centering prayer is 20 minutes. But if this is your first time with centering prayer and 20 minutes of silence feels a little terrifying, that's okay. You can be gentle with yourself as you get started. Try 10 minutes or even as little as 5 minutes and work your way up. As you practice centering prayer, you may find that 5 minutes will start to feel shorter and shorter as you crave more and more time where you can just be still and be with God. Also, if you're just starting out, it can be really helpful to set a timer for the duration of your prayer time. This is so you don't have to feel worried or distracted about looking at the clock. Fortunately, there is a wonderful app, believe it or not, that is just called Centering Prayer that you can search for and download on any smartphone. It's a free app that's created by the folks at Contemplative Outreach, which is the center that was founded by Thomas Keating as a way of spreading awareness about this wonderful practice. And it contains a number of different calming sounds and tones to end your prayer time, along with an adjustable timer so that you can set it for any amount of time. And it also has psalm readings and just a wealth of other options and information about centering prayer. So I highly recommend that to you. The next step is to choose a word that will serve as a symbol of your intention to stay grounded and rooted in God's presence during your prayer time. This word is not a chant or a mantra that you repeat to yourself over and over, but it's simply a word that you will gently speak to yourself when you find that you've become distracted, as a signal or a reminder for you to return your attention to God. It can be any word you like. We recommend that it be something short, something simple, and something gentle. So once you have found your place to sit and you have your timer set and you have chosen your word, now you are ready to start. You sit in silence for the duration of your prayer time with your eyes closed, or perhaps just with a soft downward gaze. You will continually withdraw your attention from whatever thoughts or feelings might come up in you, just letting them float downstream as you gently keep returning your attention to a place of resting and trusting in God. During this time, you don't need to think about God or speak to God or conjure up any images of God. You only need to be still, trusting and resting in the presence of God. Now, this is much easier said than done. While the mechanics of centering prayer are relatively straightforward and simple, the practice is not easy. For most of us, when we finally stop long enough to really allow ourselves to become aware of all that's going on in our minds and our hearts and our bodies, it can be very overwhelming. For a lot of us, this is exactly why we stay so busy, to distract ourselves from finding out what might actually happen if we just stopped. Especially in our frenetic and productivity-based culture, sitting in silence can also be uncomfortable because it feels like we're not doing anything. It can even feel wasteful with everything we have to get done with our jobs and our families and our world. Just sitting in God's presence can feel, for some of us, like unproductive time, like time that could have been better spent serving the needs of others. Interestingly, this is very similar to the attitude that Judas takes towards Mary of Bethany in our reading for Holy Monday today. But this dichotomy between action and contemplation is a false one. Letting go of what distracts us from our awareness of God's presence in our midst is what allows us to open ourselves more fully to the presence of God in one another. And that can help us to see how we can best serve one another in compassion and love. We see it with much greater clarity and wisdom. So don't be alarmed if you find yourself distracted by many things. This is very normal, especially for folks in our culture. And know that you don't need to fight against the thoughts and feelings that come up in you. You don't need to suppress them. In fact, if you try to fight against the thoughts and feelings that come up in you, you'll probably just make them worse. All you need to do when you observe that you've become distracted again is simply to speak the word that you've chosen in your mind and call yourself back to center again. You may have to do this many, many times during the course of your sit. And every now and then you might find that 3 or 4 minutes has gone by while you've been checking off your to-do list in your head or replaying a conversation you had with your spouse or a coworker. That's okay. There's a wonderful story about a young nun who approached Thomas Keating after her first session of centering prayer and said, "Oh, Father Keating, I am terrible at this. During my prayer time, I had 10,000 thoughts." To which Father Keating replied, "Wonderful, 10,000 opportunities to return to God." The goal is not for you to be able to achieve some enlightened state of inner peace in under 20 minutes. The goal is just the practice itself. To practice returning your attention to God. And with practice, this turning in your attention will become more and more second nature to you, not just during your prayer sessions, but in your everyday life. When work and worries and conflicts come up that overwhelm you, the more practiced you are at returning to center, the stronger your awareness of God will be in your everyday life. And so we invite you today to deepen your relationship with God through this simple practice of presence. Those of you who have a Holy Week resource guide will find a short liturgical form that you can use to frame your time of silent prayer. It uses language from our Book of Common Prayer. And always remember that our times of silent prayer are never meant to replace our spoken prayers, but to deepen them. Today, may God keep you in perfect peace. And remembering in the words of Isaiah that in returning and rest we shall be saved, and in quietness and trust shall be our strength.